Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Today on the show we're going to make a beanie for the baby in the family. This little beanie will fit newborns to 3 months and maybe just a little bit beyond that. The reason being is that I've designed it using a variation of the V-stitch, and that gives this beanie a certain amount of elasticity. Plus, if it's for a very little head, you can roll up the brim and they can wear it a little bit like a sailor cap. And the older they get, you can roll the brim down and it takes on a lot more of a beanie look. So this hat has a little more wearability than a standard newborn cap. Another reason I chose to make it in the V-stitch is a little while ago we did a V-stitch baby cardigan, and if you haven't had a chance to make this along with me, I'll put it in the link down below. And now you can make a little set for the new member of the family. And you don't need very much fabric for this. You'll need around 25 grams, maybe even less, baby yarn. So if you've made a baby blanket or a cardigan and you still have some of that yarn kicking around, you can make a new hat to match. So, without further ado, let's grab our hooks and our yarn, head to the craft table, and make ourselves a pint-sized beanie. I'm using 3-ply worsted weight yarn in a nice bright pink. That's for the main part of my hat. And for the trim, I have the same sized yarn in a nice shiny white. I need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and today I'm using a 4.25 millimeter hook, or a G6. And once you've got all of those things assembled, we can get started. We're working top down with our little beanie today, so we're going to begin with a cinch circle. Chain 1 to secure it, and after you've secured your cinch circle, you can chain 3 more. These 4 chains represent a double crochet chain 1, which, as you know, is half of a V-stitch. To complete the V-stitch, we're going to double crochet into the cinch circle. And there is our first V-stitch. We're going to do a total of 8 into this circle, and a V-stitch regularly looks like this. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. One more time. A V-stitch is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Alright, so that's 3 so far. You're going to continue working the V-stitch until you have a total of 8 of them worked into your cinch circle. You should have something that looks like this. So there's the first V-stitch we made that was actually chain 4 and a double crochet. You can see that it's got sort of a V shape. Then you skip to the next one. You're going to have double crochets that sit right next to each other and won't have a space between them. So that's how you can kind of identify your V-stitches. So make sure you have 8 of them worked into your cinch circle, and then you can grab your little short tail and carefully cinch it shut so that you don't have a hole or much of a hole there. It might be a little wiggly, but that's okay. It's going to iron itself out. Then we're going to find that first chain 4 that we made, count up 3, and slip stitch into the 3rd one to join this row. Now every row needs to start in the middle of a V-stitch. So we're going to slip stitch into the next chain 1 space. That puts us in the middle of a V-stitch. That completes row 1. And now we're going to switch up the pattern a bit for row 2. We're going to create a regular shell. So we're going to chain 3 into that same space, so we're still in the same space. You're going to double crochet twice more. So there is a 3 double crochet shell. You're going to chain 1, skip over to the middle of the next V-stitch. So remember, you're going to have 2 double crochet that sit right next to each other. It's the chain 1 space you want to look for. And into that chain 1 space, you're going to work 3 double crochet. Chain 1, find the next V-stitch or the chain 1 space and work another 3 double crochet or a shell into that chain 1 space. And you're going to work that little pattern all the way around. At the end of row 2, you should have 8 shells. At the end of row 2, you should have something that looks like this. You have 8 3 double crochet shells. Each one of them is worked into the chain 1 space of the previous row, and you've chained 1 in between each shell to provide a little bit of a spacer. So make sure you chain 1 before you close up your row. You're going to count up to the top of the chain 3 that you began the row with and slip stitch into the top of it. That completes row 2. Because we want to start in a space, we need to slip stitch across to that first chain 1 space. So you're going to slip stitch across the top of the next 2 stitches. And just get into the habit of this because every single row needs to begin in a chain 1 space. All right, row 3. We are back to the V-stitch. We are going to chain 4. Remember, the chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. And into that same space, you're going to double crochet. Now before we leave this space, we're going to work one more V-stitch into it, which is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. All right, you're going to skip over to the next chain 1 space, and you're going to work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet twice into it. So in other words, 2 V-stitches. There's 1. And there's 2. So far we have 2 V-stitches worked into each of the chain 1 spaces from the previous row. We're not adding any spacers in between them. We're just going V-stitch, 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 and then you're going to work the same thing, 2 V-stitches into each chain 1 space all the way around. So at the end of row 3, you will have 16 V-stitches. All right, you should have something like this at the end of row 3. You've got 2 V-stitches worked into each of the chain 1 spaces from the previous row. You're going to count up 3 chains of that chain 4 we began the row with and slip stitch into the 3rd chain to join the row. We have to start the row next in a chain 1 space, so we're going to slip stitch into that chain 1 space. That puts us in the right place to start row 4. And row 4, we're back to the large shells. So you're going to chain 3. That counts as a double crochet. Work 2 more double crochet into that same space. You're going to chain 1, and you're going to work another shell into the next chain 1 space. So every single chain 1 space all the way around gets a 3 double crochet shell. Each shell needs to be separated by a single chain. So at the end of this row, you'll have 16 full-sized shells. At the end of row 4, you should have 16 shells. Each shell is worked into the middle of the V-stitch from the row previous. Be careful that you didn't get the space between. So you see there's a V-stitch, V-stitch, both worked into that previous stitch. And then there's a little space in between them. Make sure you didn't work a shell into that. So your shells should all be in the middle of your V-stitches. Chain 1s in between each. Make sure you chain 1 more before you close up your row. Track up to the top of the chain 3 that you began this row with and slip stitch. Now of course we want to start in a space, so we're going to slip stitch across the top of those next 2 double crochets and into the space. And that's where we start row 5. We are back to the V-stitch, so we're going to chain 4, That counts as a double crochet, chain 1. You're going to double crochet into the same space. And now you're going to chain 1, find the next chain 1 space, and work a V-stitch into it. So we are no longer increasing. You will have 16 V-stitches when you are finished working this row, and this is the row you're going to repeat for the rest of the entire pattern. So you chain 1, skip over to the next space between shells, work a V-stitch into it, which is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, skip over to the next space, work a V-stitch, and so on. That's row 5. I'll catch up with you at the end. At the end of row 5, you should see a bit of curling starting. Don't worry if it's not, because it will definitely start to curl on your next rows, but you can sort of bend it back down so that you're still working around the outside of it. Make sure you chain 1 more after your last V-stitch. Count up to the 3rd chain in that chain 4 you began the row with, and slip stitch to join your row. And there is the hat started. You're going to start every row in the middle of a V-stitch, so always make sure that you slip stitch into that space to start the row. Every row from here on out is a repeat of row 5, so we chain 4 to begin, and double crochet into that same space. And that works a V-stitch into the V-stitch of the previous row. So all of your V-stitches are going to line up on top of each other. Chain 1 in between V-stitches, skip over to the next V-stitch and work a V-stitch into that one. So double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Chain 1, skip over to the next V-stitch, and repeat. You're going to join every row with a slip stitch in the 3rd chain of the chain 4. You're going to slip stitch into the space right next to it so that you can start your next row, chain 4 to start, and continue with your V-stitch pattern. You're going to work this pattern for a total of 12 rows. And once you're at the end of row 12, I will show you how to work the little brim. Once you've finished with row 12, you should have something that looks like a little beanie hat. Now we're going to work a bottom row for our brim, and for anybody who wants to add a colored trim at the end, we'll do that right after this. So this is row 13. For consistency's sake, we're going to slip stitch into the next space, and that's where we're going to start row 13. We're going to chain 1, and into the same space that we just chained 1 out of, we're going to single crochet. And you are going to single crochet into every stitch and chain 1 space along. So you work a single crochet into the next stitch, a single crochet into the next space, a single crochet into the next stitch, and so on. So it'll be stitch, space, all the way around, just working plain old single crochet. Once you get all the way back round to the beginning, make sure you work a single crochet into that last chain 1 space, then into the top of that same place that you fastened off the last row in. So it might be a little tight, but remember you need to put a stitch there. And then join with the slip stitch to the top of the single crochet that you began the row with. And that's it. You can snip your yarn. You don't need very much tail. Fasten off. And then, if you're going to add a trim border like I'm going to, with a little bit of white or whatever color you've chosen, you can either work over this tail or you can take your yarn needle and weave it in back and forth across the back of those stitches before you get going. But I'm just going to work over top of mine. I'm going to grab my trim color and I'm going to make a slip knot. It's not too tight or too loose. I'm going to pick up my hat. I'm going to identify the stitch right next to where I fastened off, and I'm going to slip my hook through it and join my new yarn color with a single crochet.
And I'm going to work over both of my tails. You don't have to. You can weave them in later if you like. And that's it. I'm just going to single crochet now into every single crochet of the previous row. And that will be just a nice little addition of some color for trim around the brim. And like the previous row, once you get back round to the beginning, you want to slip stitch into the top of that single crochet that you started the row with. In this case, it's also where we joined our new color. And then grab your scissors, snip your yarn, and fasten off. Grab your yarn needle, and you can weave that little tail in underneath the backs of the stitches, just inside the brim. So stick to the same color, just so it doesn't show through. Try not to pull it too tight. You don't want to pull your little brim out of alignment. And then you can skip over a piece of a stitch and go back through the same stitches that you just worked that tail through. This will make sure that your little tail doesn't work itself out while it's being worn or washed.
And there you have it. One adorable baby beanie, or two. I also took the liberty of adding a cute little applique to mine. So you can fold up the brim and tack on a little flower or something, or you can just sort of tack it along the edge like I did here. And this is all ready for a little girl 3 months of age, or maybe a little bit beyond, depending on the size of her head. And if you want to do a cute little applique like this daisy, I'll put the link for this and a few other cute little appliques we've done in the description box down below. But we've done plenty. We've done hearts and stars and anchors, and we've got a great little playlist of all of our appliques. You can find it on our channel homepage. So if you click on my username, it'll take you to our channel homepage. You can scroll down and find the applique playlist, and there's all sorts of cute little decors in there that you can add to your hat, if you're so inclined. And that's it for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time on the Jayda InStitches show, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week. Bye!